Hello Internet, or perhaps I should say good evening. We're going to be delving into universal classic monster territory in the run up to Halloween, and we're starting with 1931's Dracula. Also, the Spanish language version that was filmed at the same time from this frankly astonishingly good Blu-ray box set from Universal. The only way this could be bettered is if it included all their movies, but 8 classic monster movies, plus the Spanish version, Dracula, which we'll get to and I watched this morning, and is a revelation. Before we get to that, there is a name that every die-hard horror fan should have tattooed on their chest. It's a name that they should know. It's a name that I am embarrassed that it's taken me this long to learn. It's Carl Laemmle Jr. Who's he? He's the son, as you would be able to guess, of Carl Laemmle, who was a founder of Universal Studios, and his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., was head of production from I jotted it down, 1928 to 1936. Carl Laemmle Jr. loved horror. He pushed hard for the rights to Dracula and Frankenstein et al. And while he was developing Dracula, everyone said he was crazy. At the time, there was no such concept as a straightforward horror movie. Dracula itself was advertised as a romance, as a dark romance, as a romantic thriller. If you called something a flat-out horror movie, they wouldn't understand. Now, sure, in Europe, we'd had the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu and Count Orlok and the like. But if it wasn't for Carl Laemmle Jr.'s love of horror and his insistence, against all advice to the contrary, that it made zero financial business sense to adapt this work by Bram Stoker, we would not have the horror cinema that we've got today. If that film if it had been bullheaded and that film had flopped, bear in mind, we still wouldn't have the horror cinema we've got today. People wouldn't make vampire movies. People wouldn't, or not for a long, long time. The film was a success. Frankenstein was a success. A few years later, the revived double bill of Dracula and Frankenstein saved a lot of cinema chains and gave a second wind to a net new generation of Universal horror movies. And without Frankenstein and the Wolfman and the Mummy and Dracula from Universal, we wouldn't have got them reinvigorated again through Hammer. And just the notion of what we would have as horror fans if it wasn't for the single-mindedness of Carl Laemmle Jr. to get Dracula made. I shudder to think what slim pickings we would have today. But enough about Carl Laemmle Jr. Let's talk about frickin' Dracula. I watched the Bela Lugosi version last night to reacclimatise myself to it. There's an option on the Blu-ray to watch it with Ron Glass's score that he was commissioned to write in the 90s, because the film doesn't have a score. It sits in a strange position away from the silent cinema era, but in the middle of the transition from silent to the talkies. It's a sound picture, but at the time no one could conceive that people would sit and watch a scene being played out with music in the background. So music played over the credits, Swan Lake, and music was there when there was a reason for music to be there. So like when they go to the theatre and there's an orchestra playing, then there's music. But otherwise the film is strangely and eerily silent. Watching it with the commissioned piece of music gave it a little bit more pep. for me. Some of the pacing. Bear in mind, this is a movie that's over 80 years old, so it's very quiet for a non-silent movie. Audiences were just kind of adjusting to the talkies. Some of the acting stars were still at the silent era mode, very grand and very specific. Okay, so Bela Lugosi may be a little mannered for some people's tastes, and some of the other actors in this may be a little mannered. But my God, you can't take your eyes off him. Given that there are long portions of this film that are without dialogue, the man's always working. The intensity of his performance and the little micro expressions and the changes that come across his face to indicate what's going on inside his head is it is magnetic, and it's supposed to be. Lugosi's interpretation of Dracula, which, let's face it, has stamped the image of Dracula for all time. When people think of Dracula, they think of Bela Lugosi. When a production tries to get away from that look, like the Francis Coppola movie, where Dracula looks nothing like Bela Lugosi, they're setting themselves always, in the back of your mind, they're always setting themselves in opposition to the image of Bela Lugosi with the widow's peak and the non-blinking eyes, and he never blinks in this movie, and the mesmerism and the cape and the dinner jacket. So even when he's not, even when that image is not present in a Dracula movie, it's because the movie is setting up an image in opposition to this image of Dracula that we all have in our minds, which is Bela Lugosi. He's fascinating to watch. The Hungarian accent accentuates that. He's the rictus grin he puts on. He plays Dracula like someone who's, well, we know the character's lived for centuries, but someone who is now in a sort of death rictus, trying to put a facsimile of a human face on, the facsimile of a smile, when he now goes out in society and bows and acts around people. He's a creature that is acting how he seems to remember humans are supposed to act, and you can't take your eyes off him. The showdown between him and Van Helsing in the drawing room it's a remarkable example of that, and both actors play it with panache. It's very, very minimal dialogue, but the battle of wills that goes on, dialogue free, just across both faces as Dracula tries to hypnotise Van Helsing and Van Helsing tries to break free, is possibly one of the standout moments in the movie for me. Absolutely brilliant. While the American production shot during the day, a Spanish team came on during the night using the same shooting script and the same sets and the same marks on the floor, and filmed the Spanish language version of Dracula, which I'd never got round to watching until this morning, because I wanted to deal with both movies in this one video. Why has it taken me so long? It's about 20 minutes longer, and I think there's good reason for that. When Dracula and Frankenstein were re-released for their double bill, they had to go up against the Hays Code, and some cuts were made, and I actually think that the only version we've got, which is the version that's restored now, is a censored version, and I think some of the extra scenes in the Spanish language version were in the original Dracula and are now just lost to time. But there's more in the Spanish version. But there's more of everything. Apart from Bela Lugosi's Dracula, the Spanish actor who plays Dracula, he's just not my cup of tea. The Spanish actor that plays Renfield does an excellent job, but he's no Dwight Fry, who for me is one of the standout performances in the English language Dracula. Every other aspect, though, of the Spanish language version, I will stick my neck out and say is superior. The camera moves more freely. It's almost as if this production crew were more experimental, pushing the envelope of cinema language more. The camera pushes in, pulls back, moves. It's a lot less static. This film is based more on the stage play of Dracula than Bram Stoker's novel. So there's lots of drawing rooms, and Todd Browning, as skilled as he is, I think still has the stage in the back of his mind and shoots it like a stage. The camera is very often stationary, and the drawing room is treated like the stage, and players come in and players leave. The Spanish crew move around. The Spanish actors in a scene, if they're not speaking, they're moving, they're reacting, they're doing things. So yeah, there's more camera movement, there's more life, and maybe it's the Spanishness of the actors, but they're a lot less stiff, they're a lot looser, they're a lot freer. Your Mina character shows a lot more flesh. Whereas Mina in the English language one is very buttoned up to the throat and down to the wrists. The Spanish Mina has plunging necklines and bare arms, and not to put too fine a point on it, from the moment she drinks Dracula's blood onwards, so is in his thrall. You can see her nipples through her nightdress, which is, if it's being commented on now in 2015, in 1931, my goodness. But you don't get that in the English language version. Not one jot, my friend. They do more little bits of business. Doors open and close on their own. They have this little trick whenever Dracula's coffin opens. It opens towards you so you can't see what's inside it, and smoke spills out, and then Dracula sort of rises up, lit from below through it. All these little extra bits of business that they add that aren't in the English language version. There are such subtle differences between the way it's shot, but also character differences, that honestly, now for me, having watched the Spanish version this morning, because it's missing Bela Lugosi and his towering performance, for me now personally, the only way to watch 1931's Dracula is to now watch both of them, either back to back or a few days apart. I now can't conceive of watching one without the other. If I watched the English language one, I'd take the highlights from that, but I'd be missing the extra scenes with Renfield where we get more character with that. I'd be missing the scene where we actually find out that Van Helsing and Harker have killed Lucy. But if I watched the Spanish version standalone, I'd be missing Dwight Fry as Renfield and that amazing laugh. I'd be missing Bela Lugosi. But again, if you just watch the English one, you miss all the stuff on the ship coming over with Renfield in the hold, looking through the porthole as though he's in hell, laughing whilst Dracula's slaughtering the crew above. A remarkable film. I should not have waited so long to watch the Spanish language version of Dracula. If all you know is the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula, I urge you, and it's a great time to watch it in the run-up to Halloween, I urge you to watch the Spanish language version as well. We're going to be tripping through an awful lot of monsters in the Universal stable over the next few weeks. We're going to be looking at Frankenstein and the Wolfman and all of their sequels and monster mashes as well. So I hope you can join me, and really looking forward to Halloween now.